Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sumer Sports Show. I am hosting today Parker Fleming. I'm filling in again for Eric Eager and Thomas Dimitrov, and actually some fun news on that front before I introduce my co-host today. We'll actually be transitioning over the summer to one show a week. You'll get me and hopefully a great rotation of Sumer Sports folks and maybe some outside guests as well to talk football, to talk data, to talk analytics. So we'll be fun to get a nice nerdy compliment to Eric and Thomas talking once a week, but should be very, very fun there. Today, going to start that rotation of this summer off with a friend of mine and a colleague of mine. Quinn MacLean joins us from the show. Quinn is a data scientist at Sumer along with me, and excited to have him here. We got some interesting topics today to talk about today. Quinn, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Parker. And before we get into everything, I just want to give you a congratulations because I know Monday was a pretty big milestone for yourself in successfully defending your thesis. So can I address you as Dr. Parker the rest of the show or not?
Look, I got some paperwork that I got to finish before it's all, and the ink hasn't dried, but the big hurdles have been cleared. So yeah, successfully defended the dissertation on Monday, which was a nice hectic addition to our work with the draft this past weekend. Quinn was with me and everyone else in Sumer in Atlanta. We had the war room going on, and we're kind of taking care of issues and everything this week. It was a lot of fun, but really, really hectic. And I got to come home and work on that dissertation defense. So thank you. I appreciate that. And again, glad you're here. Quinn, before we get into our football topics for today, what I'll say, tell me a little bit about your role at Sumer and kind of what you focus on day to day and kind of overall.
Yeah. So as you kind of briefly mentioned, I work as a data scientist on our business to business side. One of the key projects I'm in charge of is our college to pro projection. So, which is timely with the draft. We kind of take a lot of the information from the league and other sources and compile that into future projections for the pro players, which is what I'm a part of and probably what I'll speak more towards today. And as far as how I got to Sumer Sports, kind of a long trail. I feel like for anyone that's trying to come out of their undergraduate, you can maybe follow my path a little bit, but I went to the University of Oregon. You can kind of see Autzen Stadium over my shoulder there. Which I think sabotaged my future view of football a little bit. I was there from 2010 to 2014. We went to a national championship. We had Marcus Mariota for a few years, Chip Kelly. I just fell in love more with the game from being there during that time, and studied sports marketing. I know that's kind of a sin in our space to be a business major and work in the data science, but I fully embraced it. One of my professors at University of Oregon was actually a direct report to Roger Goodell before he took the commissioner spot. So we learned the ins and outs of NFL marketing, and I thought that was kind of the space I wanted to get into, but I leaned more towards the data aspect, which is why I ended up going to work for an investment company. And I basically started their people analytics division as their first analyst there. Did that for about 7.5 years. And then while I was working there, I got my master's in data science from Northwestern, and started to get more towards that, like, oh, there's an opportunity in the sports area with data. To which, I entered the Big Data Bowl, was an honorable mention. I started producing my own work like yourself on Twitter, and, luckily got into the, view of a lot of the people at Sumer Sports to get an opportunity to interview there.
Awesome. What was your Big Data Bowl? I don't think I've done it. I think I filed yours, and then Adam Vonderhaar is another one. Obviously Udit as well, who's on our team. Yeah. And I've read Udit's and I've looked at Adam's. I don't think I've gotten to yours yet. What was your Big Data Bowl project on?
So mine was special teams project. So I evaluated gunners. My core thesis was, how do gunners make it to the Pro Bowl every single year? How are they?
I lied. I have seen your work. I just didn't. It was before we knew each other, and before we both started working at Sumer, so I didn't put together that was you. Awesome. Okay, yeah. So tell us about gunners, and how did you go about kind of evaluating them?
Yeah. So those that are not familiar with the Big Data Bowl, it's the NFL releases a bit of tracking data. So there's some microchips in the shoulder pads in the ball that you can track the movement to 10th per second. So they have a theme every single year as far as a phase or portion of the game. It just so happened the year that I did it was special teams. And my simple question was, what makes a gunner valuable, and how is Matthew Slater making it to the Pro Bowl every single year? Is he truly good, or is he just a popular name on the ballot? And turns out he's actually very good at it. And so I looked at those gunners that limit return yards over expected, and those gunners that are quickest to get to the ball over expected as well. And so when I aggregated it, the top two guys ended up for the following season being Matthew Slater, number 2, and then JT Gray from the Saints. When I came at this was based off of 2020 data, and I believe he got voted into the Pro Bowl the year after. So felt validated by that prediction, but it was a cool project to go through. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Nice. Yeah. And sometimes I find with the football stuff and the Big Data Bowl does a good job of this, of saying, hey, here's an area in football that you haven't necessarily explored before, and you get to come at it fresh. Cause like every piece of analysis you or I do, we do have our priors and we do kind of have our preconceived notions and our worldview about how things should happen, and getting to approach a problem fresh is kind of fun. Well, yeah, awesome. Well, that's interesting work and cool. Yeah. And a good testament to the idea that that there are many roads that lead to a career in sports analytics. You don't just have to, work, be a graduate assistant or work for a team or anything. And you can do good work and put it out there publicly and network and create a good perception, and good people will find you. So,
yeah, absolutely.
To all of you, aspiring data scientists, that's certainly a path to follow there. Okay. Let's talk a little football. I think it's probably prudent to do on the show today. Again, we're here kind of in the lull period. The undrafted free agents have been signed.
Yeah.
We're not reporting to the facilities for a little bit, and the dust is kind of settling. But I think when you wrote an article that was excellent, one, up on the Zone at Sumer Sports, and two was pretty timely, specifically about Brock Purdy and about late round breakout quarterbacks. So before we kind of get to the central thesis of that and talk about identifying late round talent, what kind of put that on your radar? How did you start thinking about this as a project to work on, in conjunction, of course, with your late nights of coding with the College to Pros as well?
Yeah, I think it was part of putting together some of the models for College to Pro, and starting to understand some of these variables a little bit more. I started to educate myself more on, what does it take to be a good quarterback when you're transitioning from the college game to the pro league. And, that times every position to the league. You start to understand some of those metrics that are a little bit more keen on that you can hone in. And I think quarterback was just interesting because of the story of Brock Purdy, because of the story of, Tom Brady. I'm not trying to bucket those two in the same sentence, but you could start to take a little bit of like
NFL's great late round undiscovered talents, Tom Brady and Brock Purdy.
Right. Yeah. And you could also throw Dak Prescott, right? These like day 3 prospects that, flourish to the next level. What do they have in common in some ways? So it's kind of I would say the impetus of why I kind of dove a little bit deeper into that. And I think not like the thesis of it is there's opportunities with these late round draft picks to find certain traits and get them at a discount level, and then understanding what traits that you as an organization can start to minimize within your scheme or organization is kind of the crux to it and what I learned from it. It was a cool process to go through, but yeah, I think when I first started to go through it, first is like we use my core evaluation metric to use was an adjusted plus minus model, which, our colleague Paul Sabin put together and wrote a paper on. There's a link into it in there as well. And what adjusted plus minus does is it starts to measure the relative effect of that player's effect to the overall game when they're on the field versus off the field. Is the core simple.
Which, as I understand it, with quarterbacks is a little bit easier to do than, say, offensive linemen or defensive secondary, for instance. Just because the nature of there's a very discrete break about what an offense can do with a starter versus a backup, or one quarterback versus another. And so I think that quarterback lends itself very nicely to kind of this plus minus analysis. Because a lot of this plus minus stuff came out of like hockey or basketball, where there are very discrete line changes, very, very not easy. Easy is not the right word, because there's been a lot of work and it's solved now. So it looks easy now, but a little bit easier to isolate the effect of one of 5 or one of 6 skaters, five skaters and a goalie, one of 5 players or 5 skaters than it is necessarily 11 guys who all have fairly different roles. And so quarterback definitely lets you kind of say who is when you're on the field, when you're off the field, what matters. Of course, there's going to be a little bit. I'm interested. I might be jumping the gun here. There's going to be a little bit of a selection issue because what you did with the plus minus is you looked at the projections for the first 3 years, right, of each rookie quarterback, again, based on draft position, because there's some information in that, based on history, based on college production, based on combine results, and put those together. Is there any worry about, when you're evaluating quarterbacks, kind of a selection issue with the fact that maybe some of these late round guys are only going to get in bad situations, or only going to get in garbage time situations, or if you're bad, you don't play a lot, so I don't have a lot of plus minus data on you? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, from a college perspective, you have to adjust some of the scheme and competition level when you're starting to look into some of those variables. And I think that does a good job in the adjusted plus minus. Is you can start to adjust it with your priors a bit to what your competition level is. And, if you're blowing up on a D3 school, obviously your just plus minus is going to be out, or your plus minus is going to be through the roof. But when you start to adjust that to your competition level, the scheme that you're in, are you in a more pass happy scheme? Are you one that's more run heavy? I think that's lends itself, and why we look at that from an adjustment standpoint, it's more valuable to start to contextualize that. But as you kind of called out, like plus minus is going to start to value a little bit of some positions more than others. But I think that's kind of gets to the crux of studying football in itself, is that there's some positions that are a little bit more easier to get a read on than others.
Yeah, absolutely. And the priors, I think, are really informative. One, I think some people kind of shy away at priors with like rankings or ratings or predictions. But if you don't have strong priors, what you're saying is every college player that steps on the field is the same at the beginning of our data set. And we fundamentally know that's not true.
Right.
And things like, Air Force's quarterback always grades, among the highest in passer rating because he has 9 attempts for 98 yards or whatever, and always is able to throw bombs there. So definitely some issues to kind of help us, ground that analysis. Okay. So before, again, we're getting into thesis, we're going to talk about Brock Purdy. I promise. If you're in the chat and you're just waiting for Brock Purdy, we're going to get to it, and we're going to get to this year's Brock Purdy. Why are early quarterback? This sounds dumb. I'm putting you up a softball here, so hit this one out of the park. Why are early round quarterbacks, drafted in the first couple of rounds, so much difference in a sense, in a term of volatility and difficulty of projections than those late round quarterbacks?
It comes down to the value of the pick. I feel like there's a little bit more at stake for early round quarterbacks, right? Like if we take a top 10 quarterback, you're thinking in terms of the pick value anywhere in the range of 50 million to 70 million over that rookie contract. So there's a lot more at stakes in terms of projecting. And the difficulty for the quarterbacks too is just sample size, right? Like we have a hard time of looking at the quarterbacks that have actually had playing time in the league versus in those first few picks versus the late round picks as well. Few and far between in terms of like those players drafted day 3. The only reason we're talking about Brock Purdy in some ways is a confounding variable of Jimmy G getting injured, right? And entering the possibility that we can start to measure that.
And Trey Lance, who they traded up to go get in the early rounds as well. So in some ways we have to talk about the fact that the 49ers built a team around a rookie contract. It just wasn't the first round rookie contract that he thought it was going to be.
Right. Yeah. And it speaks to, you kind of stumble in some ways into this lottery, knowing that the rookie wage scale is a bit fixed. And when you're presented with the opportunity of playing, not just a Brock Purdy, but, Dak Prescott outperforming in off-season camp, like if you're the Cowboys in that situation, why not put him in to play more, knowing that the value of his contract is a little bit more minimal than, say, an aging Tony Romo at the time, right?
Right.
And so, like, I think that speaks to, and the difficulty of the two is, I'm not trying to have the strategy of just draft late round quarterbacks because their value is immense. It's just harder to create those situations to put them in. I think when you're in the position of drafting a first round quarterback, you're more likely just to, and that they're going to get a lot more playing time than, say, a late round draft pick where the opportunities are just not going to rise compared to any other position.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is important, again, to say out loud as we're being analytical and thinking about this. Saying that there's value in late round quarterbacks doesn't mean go draft Tyson Bagent and say we've done a great job and we've changed and don't reach for a guy, because there is a little bit of kind of first mover advantage or like an equilibrium, a dynamic equilibrium in a game theory sense of, okay, well, if I know the 7th round quarterback is a breakout candidate, why don't I take him in the 6th round? But then if my opponents know that they're going to take him in the 5th round and it kind of moves up and you potentially see something like a team taking Stetson Bennett in the 4th round, whereas he is probably more in line with these potential breakout candidates. Okay, before we get to the breakout, please.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to that, I think it kind of expands every single position in some sense when you start to line up your college to pro projections against where you think the market's going to go for that position, right? So if you think a quarterback, or let's not use quarterback, let's use a offensive tackle that you strongly desire, right? And if you think the market has him as a 2nd or 3rd round, but in your grading and your projections as a 1st round, it's really just difficult from a GM's perspective and front office to be disciplined to wait for that guy that's at a 2nd round value when you know he's a 1st round talent, right? And you see some of those smarter organizations do that, and I applaud them for it because you have information, you've cross-checked it, you've interviewed the guy, they've gone through the combine, they've gone through the medical checks. You feel like you've done your due diligence. Why not just move up and get the guy? But at the end of the day, you can play a little bit of that rookie wage scale and wait to get your guy, knowing that he has the potential to be surplus value even more so in those later round picks.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you can hold back. I do wonder, this is kind of my weird, kind of off-field thought about the draft, but like there is this warm glow feeling for GMs in the draft, I think.
Yeah.
And it's totally understandable. Like it's got to feel really good to say, all right, I've got this guy as a 1st round grade. No one else does. I'm going to get him and he's going to be a meaningful contributor. That's got to feel so good. And I don't mean that trivially. Like that's awesome. That's a testament to your evaluation skills and your department and everything. And it's very hard to trade that off of, again, as a GM, every couple of years, you're making sure that your team is on the right path. We know the turnover rate of GMs, for example. And so you're able to kind of applaud yourself and say, hey, we scouted this guy way better than anyone else did. And then he played for us for a couple of years. Even if we overdrafted him, that's still something that's beneficial. So we're certainly weighing those constraints against kind of the can you wait until the appropriate draft position?
Yeah, and I'll add to that. It's hard for a GM. I know Eric and Thomas have talked about this quite a bit. Given the average tenure of GMs, it's a little bit more difficult in your first few years to show that level of discipline and wait for a guy when you're just getting acclimated to the entire staff. You're trying to figure out what information is trustworthy. You've gone through the process maybe within that organization. Now you're running the show, or a lot of these new GMs have come in the league. They've come from other organizations and still getting their bearings as far as what information they should look at. My hat's off. It's a difficult process to go through, which is where modeling like ours can at least give it as a starting point in the process. And you can allow some of those scouts in other parts or spend more time in the other portion of the process to do some of that cross-check and validation so that you're absolutely sure on that portion as a way to build a bridge and relationships with other people in the organization too.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's very well said. Okay, before we talk about the 2023 class of quarterbacks and who might be the next Brock Purdy, I'm going to ask you to rigorously, if you will, define what is a Brock Purdy in the context of your article and your thought process. What constitutes a breakout late round quarterback?
So my kind of constraints or barriers, if you will, of a late round quarterback is I define it as a day 3 quarterback, right? So that would be rounds 4 through 7. And then it would be a person that maybe has a few traits within the overall like college to pro projection model for quarterbacks. Not all of them. And I think that's where the article can show, and where the Niners, I feel like in some sense helped Brock Purdy flourish, is they capitalize on some of those high-end traits that would work well within his scheme, and minimize, lack of better words, his deficiencies overall.
Yeah. So we're looking for, when we're thinking about late round breakout quarterbacks, the proverbial Brock Purdys, we're thinking about guys who have a wider range of outcomes. So maybe a lower ceiling than, a Trevor Lawrence or somebody in the first round, but also a much lower floor, a much broader range of outcomes. You have this great graph, and podcasting is a visual medium. We always like to joke. And so I can't show it, but I'll describe it. And you should go look at the article. That's just the value of draft picks in their first 3 years. And it's non-quarterbacks versus quarterbacks. And you just see this volatility of quarterbacks and how broadly scattered the position is. It's hard to capitalize on that. And so it's maybe we're talking about players who have the necessary conditions in the right system to be able to direct a functioning offense. Okay, so let's talk about some of these guys. We've got, 7, 8, 9 maybe? Jake Haener from Fresno State went to the Saints. Stetson Bennett from Georgia went to LA. The Chargers, not the Rams, excuse me. Is that correct? The LA logo is confusing to me. Yeah, no, we're good.
Yeah, okay. Bennett went to the Rams.
The Chargers, not the Rams. Aiden O'Connell from Purdue, air raid quarterback, went to the Raiders. Clayton Tune from Houston, kind of an air raid quarterback, went to the Cardinals. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, a very much a Chip Kelly quarterback, went to UCLA. Sean Clifford from Penn State gets taken in the 5th round by Green Bay. Jaron Hall from BYU fell a little bit, but lands with Minnesota. Tanner McKee additionally fell from Stanford. He went to the Eagles in the 6th round, and the last quarterback off the board was Max Duggan from TCU, who got taken in the 7th round. So a list of names that on many levels are kind of college heroes. Some of these guys put up great numbers, had great moments, and were really college good quarterbacks. What do we want to look for in trying to figure out how these guys are going to be, translate that college good to NFL good?
Yeah, so when we start to build up the profile of Brock Purdy, there's a few metrics I started to focus on that Brock Purdy, at least, excelled relative to his peers in. The first was, I first looked at, and this wasn't the core one, but an adjusted PFF passing grade. So what I mean by that is, as we talked about college, there's a lot of variance. Your competition level from year week to week is going to vary quite a bit. So when you start to adjust that for a scheme fit, are they in an air raid offense or a ground first offense, and competition level, it can show as a starting point who the best passers are relative to what position they're put in, right? And I will pause there because that alone, when you start to use those passing grades, is a little deceptive. Brock Purdy only had about a 25th percentile passing grade his final season. Final season being a little bit more volatile, as we know as college fans, of his previous seasons, right? And a little bit maybe misleading too, because as we know, Iowa State was a little bit more of a run first offense. He had David Montgomery his freshman year, and then Breece Hall the last few years, right? So, which I think is also a little bit more impressive when you start to look at his actual total number of passing stats or passing reps, if you will. He had a high number of passing plays altogether when he had NFL caliber running backs to turn around and hand the ball off to. But the players that why the passing grade is a little bit hard to start to rank is Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert in their final season had lower passing grades than the 25th percentile. And that's even after adjusting for scheme. And I know anecdotally, I've watched a lot of Justin Herbert football. He was in a very pass or run heavy offense as well, right? And similar to what you just mentioned on Chip Kelly and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, it's that offense was very much so predicated off of let's, go to the script, throw to your first read and get, throw it to ball makers in space, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's hard to translate that. I think that's a better thing in the NFL. I think it's harder to translate throwing to your first read from college when you get into pro, because you want some guy to not just rely on the talent around them and move so much more in the offense that they're given to in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple times, Tage and I have talked about kind of a hierarchy of quarterback, college to pros, quarterback, abilities. And in college, you don't get all of these, and you don't even get some of these. At the base level, can you make open throws? And God love them, not every college quarterback can do that, right? And then the next one is, can you make contested throws? And then can you avoid pressure? And then can you create on broken plays after pressure and extend the play? Those are the really increasingly valuable skills in the NFL. And an issue with a guy like Herbert, even a guy like Dak Prescott, where they are running a lot. They're running that Dan Mullen offense, and the quarterback's doing a lot of things there. we're going to get a selection bias issue there because they're running so often that the most of the times that they're passing are those obvious passing situations, 3rd and long, and those are just those are not advantageous situations for the quarterback. And so the kind of menu of plays we have to evaluate them on certainly matters for the scheme and the types of that also increases the variance and the uncertainty of those quarterbacks, because we think that, they're good on some of these plays, but they, does that carry over as they get more plays in different situations?
Yeah.
Does it improve? Is it worse? It's a very hard problem to solve.
Yeah. And when I started looking at that, what I was kind of inspired a little bit by is it's really what you're trying to measure in terms of college quarterbacks is how well are they in terms of their mobility, right? And there's a few metrics that can kind of go into that. I know our colleague Paul Saban wrote an article about like how young quarterbacks tend to rely a little bit more on their feet as they're learning to throw and getting more accustomed to the offense. If you can find a quarterback at the college level that is accustomed and a little bit more comfortable in that mobility, right, and let plays develop, I think that translates a little bit more to the next level. And Paul called out like Jalen Hurts and now Justin Fields, and those are guys that, for lack of better words, were very run first because they were trying to learn that offense and, try to get the ball down the field a little bit more. And so that leads me into the secondary metrics that I use in this evaluation of quarterbacks. The second being is time to throw variance. I know when we scout, so that's variance within plays or from play to play, there's time to throw. And that time to throw here is measured in seconds. So I think I've always been taught throw the ball or get the ball out as quick as possible, right? But in college, you don't get all the context of what that actually means. And so I think looking at something sort of as variance from play to play can start to behind the curtain show a little bit more of decision making. I think offensive coordinators in terms of college are smart enough to limit the decisions that a college QB has to make. And so if you're a college QB and you're just reading from the teleprompter, you're more likely just to throw to your first read, knowing that that's how the offensive coordinator set it up. And it's probably a little bit more of an optimal strategy. And so when you start to look at the ranking of players that were really high in terms of time to throw variance in college, the top results that I was saying were Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts. I think I listed a few other here that had high time to throw variances. And they were just people that worked within a little bit more optimal offenses or juggernaut offenses, and they let play develop, and they were throwing downfield a little bit more. So I think that time to throw variance can show a player's ability to be comfortable in the midst of pressure and let plays develop and, get the ball out wherever it needs to be.
Yeah. And you look at some of these, not just variance, even just mean, you look at some of these, I have 2021 pulled up right here for the college season. You got Caleb Williams leads the nation at 3.62 seconds time to throw. Malik Willis is up there, 3.32. Skylar Thompson, Miami Dolphins quarterback, 3.23. Kenny Pickett, first round pick, 3.2. So there does seem to be some correlation with the nature of time to throw, even though it's probably non-monotonic in a way, right? If you're only throwing it really, really quickly, you're throwing screens and your offense is garbage. Right. If you're only throwing it really, really long, with very low variance, that might say something about your indecision. That might say something about your offensive line. That might say something about your receiver's ability to get separation. So much information wrapped up with that, but you kind of want to be in that sweet spot of middle long, right? That 75th percentile, for instance. Yeah.
Which led me to guys like Mac Jones, right? They get the ball out very quick. They've got a quick release. They were lauded throughout the entire evaluation process as a person to get to their first read, right? But when you start to look at their time to throw variance, he's on a very low scale. And part of me wonders if that was just because he was surrounded by great talent. He had a great offensive line. He had a very, top tier offensive play caller that he didn't have to really think about it as much. So there is some detriment to that measurement in some ways that, can make a guy fall in terms of it. But I think in terms of this evaluation class, one of the top players in terms of time to throw variance was Bryce Young. And that's a player within almost an identical offense, right? That had similar playmakers, and he was able to move outside the pocket, get the ball around, and let plays develop a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we'll say things that our astute listeners already know. We're we're not using one metric, right? We're not just
Yeah.
going to use time to throw variance. That would be problematic. So even if there are issues, using it kind of an ensemble, pulling these together, certainly helps us kind of smooth out and really get the signal out of all of this noise. Okay, so you used an adjusted passing grade. You used a time to throw variance. What are one or two other key metrics that kind of went into this evaluating these potential breakout candidates in late rounds?
Yeah, so the other one here was the ability to throw over the middle. What percentage of the pass direction was over the middle? Tage wrote a really good article about the highest EPA per pass in terms of the NFL was the ability to throw over the middle. And I think when I was studying that a little bit, looking at the college, you know that your primary receivers are going to be on the outside. So if there's a guy that's lending a little bit more towards the outside receivers, is that because they're just comfortable and it's like, all right, I know that if I can just chuck it up to this guy on the right side of the field, he'll catch it no matter what? Or is that person really, inept to read the offense and distribute across the field a little bit more? Same with what you talked about. You don't want a guy that's just throwing 75% over the field. But if there's a guy like Brock Purdy where he was about 53%, I think I referenced in my article, and 47% in the outside, you can start to that blend of inside, outside. Now you start to decipher a quarterback that's truly reading the offense and throwing and dispersing around the field. And I would be willing to bet that the Niners looked at that and they're like, okay, we've got George Kittle, we've got Deebo Samuel, we've got Brandon Ayuk, and now you've got a quarterback that's able to get the ball over the field, and that's the most optimal kind of passing strategy in terms of EPA per play. That's a strategy we can work with as far as optimizing that guy's traits, even if his deficiencies are in other areas. So that was kind of the big metric I looked at. I was like, okay, that's something that blends well to quarterbacks translating from college pro. And I put a chart on, I know we can't share it on the broadcast here, but when you start to extrapolate first round talent in terms of throwing the ball over the field versus the rest of the draft, there's a very clear difference of first round talent ability to throw at a higher percentage over the middle of the field versus the rest of the draft, which starts to get into that, thesis idea here that if you're going to look at a quarterback in the late round draft here, thanks for showing that. You want to
little janky, but I thought we could at least get the visual up here.
No, I appreciate it. But you want to find the traits of someone that has that first round talent, and their decision making across the field, and you get that now. If that's the only trait along with a few others, and they have some deficiencies, this is at least something you can work with as an offensive play caller.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, realistically, want to direct people into the article to get a little bit more of that deep dive there on some of these stats and some of these great looking graphics. But it's kind of a weird problem because you're not drafting Brock Purdy to be your playoff starting quarterback. Yeah. No one's doing that. And so there is a measure of opportunity that's kind of like, if you go looking for, it's almost a paradox of, if you go looking for the next Brock Purdy in these late rounds, you're never going to find him. But if you create the conditions and then you draft a guy that has these kind of sufficient talents, then he might turn into that. So it is kind of a weird problem to see. There are multiple players who kind of fit the bill potentially, but some of them are never going to get the opportunity. Some of them don't have the soft, tangible skills of being a football guy that get them drafted later, and it's certainly hard to prognosticate, to say in the least. So the opportunity aspect there is really, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's thinking about, from a model standpoint, we like to think of what variables hold the highest importance in terms of our models. What of those variables are attributed to first round talent that you're potentially getting at that bargain rate, that you can start to, and I know baseball does a good job of this, is you start to look at what are some traits that I can work with? What are some traits that can start right away? And if I have a good player development program and I really believe in that, I can work on those traits and make them improved, even if they're less important into the overall development of a quarterback. It just makes them more round and higher performer in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, again, not trying to tease out the who's the next Brock Purdy. I'm not adding a suspense here. But I will say, I think that another key element that might be a little bit more on the, I'll say, scouting side as opposed to the specific data side is you've got to have a really strong identity to know which of these quarterbacks is going to fit well with your system. And I think you mentioned that a little bit earlier about the 49ers. Part of the reason that Purdy did so well is because the 49ers knew what they could and could not ask of him. And frankly, not to disparage Brock Purdy at all, Quinn, I think you and I can get a couple reps throwing it to a wide open Christian McCaffrey, man, right? Like,
Yep. Yeah.
I think that certainly doesn't hurt your chances at all. So you wrote this article before any of the draft happened. And so I don't want to put you on the spot and say, all right, based on the fit, we maybe could talk about that. But who is your candidate? And again, what we are not saying right now is that this guy is going to go win multiple games and take over as the starter and be in the conversation for offensive rookie of the year and win a playoff game. That's not what we're saying. We're saying which of the guys is most likely to be that breakout based on the traits that we see, knowing that there's a huge element of random variance and opportunity and what might happen on the field.
Yeah. So giving away the punchline of the article, we going into the draft, so we didn't know the placement there. We thought Clayton Tune had the best opportunity to excel at the next level when you start to compare that to Brock Purdy. In terms of percentile comparison of a lot of these measurements that I looked at, Clayton Tune was 70th percentile performer in that time to throw variance that I mentioned. He was about average in terms of his air yards over the middle percentage. I think he was about 55%. Some other metrics we didn't really encapsulate here were pressure to sack rate, which is very important. Another mobility rate, if you will. He was about an 84th percentile performer in that, which is pretty high. I think he was in this class, he was the second overall in terms of pressure to sack rate behind Anthony Richardson, which I think underscores his ability to kind of move about the pocket. Especially, and that's what I'm talking about when you start to compare it to that first round talent of Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson has a little bit more explosive in terms of his ability, but you're getting some of those traits similar to that, a little bit more of a discount compared to him. And one thing that I looked at in comparison to Brock Purdy is, and I talked about it a little bit, and you got to be wary of it, is overall reps at the position at the college level. Both Brock Purdy and Clayton Tune were over 90th percentile in terms of overall reps. You touched on it earlier, like this Houston offense that Clayton Tune was in was very much so an air raid offense. Some other guys that were pass happy in the league, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, those are some guys that were in quite a bit of like, let's chuck it down the field, move the ball down the field. And I think reps at the position, especially for late round talent, is important because it can kind of talk to the ability to pick up the game a little bit more in multiple schemes, and the ability to be creative as you progress to the next level. Sometimes reps at the position in terms of the first round talent is a little bit of a misnomer because guys declare early and it's not as important. But I think those late round talents of some of the quarterbacks you named, of Jake Haener, Aiden O'Connell, they're going to have a lot more reps at the position. They're going to be a little bit older at the position, but I think it helps them highlight and step into a new scheme and get it right away. And now that we know where Clayton Tune got drafted, I'm definitely a little bit more excited about his opportunity, knowing that he got drafted by the Arizona Cardinals as their potential backup quarterback. I know they've got Colt McCoy there too. Is it David Bluff? I think is the other quarterback in their depth chart. And we know that Kyler Murray is going to be out for a few games. So Clayton Tune definitely has an opportunity to step in and get some reps and, hopefully prove me right in terms of playing well the first few years or first few games of next season.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a nice where kind of the opportunity coincides with what might be on the field, and the Cardinals. Not to pivot us entirely out of this, but the Cardinals might have some more incentives than other teams to know what they have in their quarterback room and know what they're going to be doing long term, because they did make a couple savvy trades, acquire some draft capital, have 2 first-round picks next year, and have an opportunity to really flip what, aside from a couple spots, is a pretty rough roster, I think is a fair assessment right now.
Yeah, and going to the overall value, hypothetically, if Tune is in that Brock Purdy situation, like you're now getting huge surplus value at the quarterback of a late round draft pick, and you have, potentially 2 top 5 picks next year. It could be interesting if that's just something they decide to shift as an organization. Not saying we're going to get there, but it could pose an interesting opportunity for them.
Yeah. And I mean, you start to talk about guys that might be available next year and not have the luxury of not having to take a quarterback could certainly change a franchise's kind of fortunes for sure. Cool. Well, Quinn, amazing article there on the Zone up on Sumer Sports. You and the rest of our colleagues just doing some really interesting stuff as we're, again, working full time, working our behinds off to get all of this stuff done for these teams. We're able to share a little bit of this and talk about football and contribute to kind of I'd say heightening the quality of online discourse around football using data and analytics. And so we'll certainly would direct people to go there. I see a couple questions, which is something I was going to bring up. If you've got a question, feel free to throw it here. Quinn, I'd love to just chat a little bit about the draft as well. So let me read this question. And we'll pull it up and talk about this. This might be a little abstract, but William Jones, I think, if I'm not mistaken, last week William Jones had a couple insightful questions. So happy he's back and in the chat here. He asks, what really is the on-field value in a Brock Purdy as someone who operates the offense effectively versus a player who changes the equation in terms of surplus value? So Quinn, I think what this question is asking is, hypothetically, would you rather is it more valuable to draft a Brock Purdy in the 7th round or a Christian McCaffrey in the 7th round? And of course, with McCaffrey's career, that's going to be a loaded question a little bit, but saying a game-changing playmaker at the non-quarterback position, what's the surplus value there relative to a quarterback in those late rounds who can start, come in and contribute?
Yeah, it's a good question. You have to start to look at the APY of the positions, right? Like a running back with the average APY is about 5 million or so per year. And so when you start to look at some of these later round pick values, the 250 range is about a 2.8 million or so. Like, you're not going to get so much surplus value in terms of a running back, even if it's a Christian McCaffrey. I think his APY is up near the 15 millions, right? So if you're talking about the average running back in the league, like, you're not gaining huge surplus value in that 250 spot or so. But if you're talking about a starting quarterback in the NFL whose APY is somewhere in the 15 to 20 millions at the 250 spot, that's a $18 million, $17 million surplus overall. That's just huge, right? And that's why I think you see some of these like quarterbacks or positions that come on and drafted in the late round by teams in terms of the quarterback position is the quarterback is worth more in terms of expected points, right? And you want to optimize for that a little bit more, but the surplus value of running backs, it's just not as much of a margin as you would think, is what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah, and even with McCaffrey being so involved in the pass game, and the value he brings there, it's still not. And again, I would much rather be able to. I mean, let's just go to the extreme case. Let's say Brock Purdy is the guy. Let's say Brock Purdy last year is going to be that valuable for the rest of his career, right? Let's just put that to the side and say, okay, this is who he is. I would rather be able to invest my picks around him in early situations and be able to build a roster in which any rookie quarterback, almost any of these guys that kind of have this sufficient threshold talent could come in and build up and succeed. So I think it's certainly from a team building standpoint, very valuable to find these diamonds in the rough, just because you can then kind of construct a roster around that with the flexibility. If Brock Purdy is $17 million in surplus value, that's $17 million you can use to go get a guy who can heighten his level even more there. So definitely some ebb and flow with kind of the surplus and how you spend it and who you draft. But again, I think Purdy, if you could find this hypothetical Brock Purdy who is, a multi-year starter or a Tom Brady, obviously multi-year starter late in the draft, that's going to be way more valuable than a breakout running back or a Tyreek Hill, for instance, I think.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add is like running backs are usually most productive in that rookie contract. So it is a beneficial strategy to find a day 3 running back every single year and plug and play, knowing that, you won't necessarily have to pay as much on that second contract in terms of over surplus value. No. So I think you see that in some teams' draft strategy is they are drafting running backs day 3, knowing that they can plug and play, and, running backs take a little bit more, take more bruises on the body is for every single rep than any other position. So it's something that you can easily turn over from year to year.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great question, William. Certainly something we're kind of thinking about as we talk about picks and all of that. Quinn, we're getting to time here that we talked about. Yeah. Hit about 45 minutes and they go there. I would love to talk about the draft a little bit. And again, this can be much less formal than presenting our research in the article and everything. We were in the same room for most of the draft and so had some of these reactions, but any big takeaways that kind of jump out at you from the draft? Anyone that surprised you that fell or went particularly high? I mean, I don't think anyone had Will Levis going 33rd overall. I think that was a shock to maybe even him and his agent looking at the broadcast there, but anything else that stands out to you about this draft?
Yeah, I think the 2 running backs in the first round is the easy one from the analytics community. That's you start to look at a little bit more. I looked at it in terms of like the numbers. Bijan's APY is 5.4 in terms of over the cap. Gibbs is APY, and when I say APY, average per year, in terms of their contract value is 4.4. That puts them as the top 20 running backs in the league without taking a snap in their average performance value there. And then in total contract value, that's the cumulative amount over their entire contract. Bijan now has a top 10 contract, and Jahmyr Gibbs has a top 13 contract. And that's not to account that the Lions already signed David Montgomery in the offseason, right? And they had him at about, right now, Jahmyr Gibbs, his APY is worth $200,000 less than David Montgomery per year, of someone that's played in the league and has kind of proven his value. And I think those were a little bit of like Jahmyr Gibbs. We're not saying Jahmyr Gibbs could end up being really good, right? But when you start to look at the value of that picks and where those contracts project in the future, you could get more savings when drafting an edge or an offensive tackle, which per year is a lot more expensive than, say, a running back. But, Gibbs could end up being really, really well. I noted that he was actually pretty good in terms of the passing game, so he could be a good replacement for what Swift's role was at Detroit. But those were some things that, in terms of value, was a little puzzling early on.
Yeah. And it's, one, I think we have to separate out, obviously fantasy points are not real life football. And so there's certainly some public conflagration of running backs are going to put up numbers. Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs are going to put up numbers. Absolutely. Right. What we're talking about in the value conversation is not that actually these running backs are bad. What we're talking about is relative to what you could have done from a team building standpoint. This is an overpay. And not in the sense of putting money back in the owner's pockets for the sake of it, in the sense of having resources to allocate across more pressing needs. If they don't work out, then you have a hole at what you expected to be a superstar position, and you still have these other issues that you could have addressed. So the positional value, I think, is really interesting. One other thing that I thought was pretty fun, I think you and I said this to each other a couple times in person last week, was rounds 2 and 3 kind of felt like they were a 7th round, just because the draft board, the expected draft boards, the viability models and everything went a little bit haywire there, just because it felt like a lot of teams had their kind of pet project. Their guy went up and got it. You think about Derek Hall from Auburn, I feel like was really the first guy that went super high relative to where we thought he would go. BJ Ojulari from LSU as well. You could see that these teams, the Seahawks and the Cardinals, really liked these guys, wanted to make a move, wanted to be aggressive. And I mostly have tabs on that, Quinn, just to see, is that going to be a trend going forward? Are we going to see more deviation from consensus as teams are hyper-specific in their scouting, as teams are, a little more aggressive about getting an impact player earlier? Interesting to see how they go here.
Yeah, and I think that might speak a little bit to the analytics community and how we think about our draft curves, right? The draft curve's a little bit steeper in the first round, and so there's a lot more focus on drafting for premium positions in the first round. And the second round is like very much so, I need to get my guy, or if you're diligent and disciplined, as we talked about to your board, maybe there's a guy that had first round talent that just fell to you. I think of like Osiris Torrance for the Bills. He was very much so graded as first round talent, as a guy that was an offensive tackle, for lack of better words, at Florida, and is athletic enough to where they can slot him on both sides of the line as a guard. And he fell to kind of the later round in the second round, which was surprising to me. So there's that, you can see that discipline of a GM like Brandon Beane that's been there a while can afford to be a little bit more disciplined and have guys go to him. In other cases, a lot of other organizations, like they got their guy. I'm not saying one strategy is better than the other, but you kind of see that split in terms of the overall strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of NFL teams, college teams had a bunch of players drafted that, Tennessee, TCU, in addition to your Blue Bloods. I thought that was interesting as well, as we see development cycles and experience matter so much more in college football. So you're going to see more often the teams that are at the top, even if especially the non-blue blood teams, a lot of guys are going to get drafted from those teams because they are successful and they are experienced all at the same time, which is a big contributor to success there. So nice to see that theory kind of pan out in real time as well.
Yeah. And I think that kind of talks to what we do as far as adjustment for on-field performance. You're adjusting to the competition. A lot of those analytics are going to start to show for better conferences of players getting drafted within those better conferences as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, Quinn, we're hitting 50 minutes here. This has been so rich diving into that Brock Purdy article. Make sure you go, listeners, to sumersports.com. You can find the zone there. There's a Quinn's article, bunch of articles, some by Paul Sabin, some by our colleague Tej Seth about yards after catch, which I think gel really nicely. And Quinn, I think you cited there. Yeah. So you can go play around on that site and find plenty of that there. Quinn, thanks for joining me, man. Thanks to all of you for listening. I'm certain, Quinn, we'll have you back on this summer as we cycle through and hit different topics. But this has been a great discussion. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to you for being here. And we'll be back next week. I can't tell all of you that I know the exact order of when Eric and Thomas are going and when me and guests, well, Tej was out of town, and then Tej when he comes back. But we will do a regular rotation that'll settle in and get into a lot of fun analytics stuff this summer. Thanks for listening, and make sure you rate, subscribe, review, all that good stuff to help us out there as well.